Howdy readers, I'm Jason, and this is Chapter and Verse, and we've got company here. Oh, hey little dude. Hi. Can you say hello? Can you say hello? Okay, there you go. And this video is my dual purpose autumn wrap-up and winter TBR. Now, if you'll remember, I've always been really a mood reader, and I would say I'm largely probably still a mood reader, but just prior to the autumn equinox, I decided that I wanted to give this a shot, this idea of putting together a seasonal TBR and doing my best to stick to it. I had never done that before in my life, and it worked. It really worked. I hewed pretty closely to it. I even added a couple of books to it. And yeah, so we're going to go over those. Then we're going to look at my plans for reading in the winter. So the first book I finished in the autumn was Shakespeare's The Tempest. And this was one of my choices for ShakeTube this year. This was the play that I ended that project with this year, and it was I don't know, my 6th time reading it or something like this, 7th maybe, and it's just brilliant. It's my favorite Shakespeare play by a country mile, and if you haven't read it, you should. Next, I read for my book club, mine and Kelly's book club, or I guess I should say mine, Kelly's, and Robert's book club, The Eclectic Shade Tree. We read Fire from Heaven by Renault. And I was in the minority on this. I don't think anybody outright hated this book in the book club, but everybody had at least some problems with it. I had fewer than most, and the parts of this book, the things about this book that I loved, that I really just took a lot of pleasure in, I think I took more pleasure in those than other people did in the parts that they liked. I'll be reading the second volume in this trilogy about Alexander the Great in summer of next year as a buddy read with Elena Macreadina. So, Fire from Heaven, Renault. And next is a book that I had been working on through the year and finally finished it, and that is The Turning, which is a collection of short stories by Tim Winton. And this is glorious. Everything that he writes is glorious, frankly. But there are 2 stories in particular in this collection that are just really stunning. The title story, and then a kind of follow-up story to it about 2 brothers who have been estranged from each other for some time, surfing, and an accident that ensues. But it's just a terrific, terrific book. We may see this one cropping up in a year-end best-of list. That remains to be seen, but The Turning. And then next I read our own Marc Nash's 3 Dreams in the Key of G, which I've talked about a couple of times here on the channel. It's a provocative, thorny, kind of stupefyingly ambitious novel that, that I think sort of falters in some ways, but I think really soars and succeeds in numerous other ways. You're looking for something that is going to really push you as a reader. Marc's book will do that. And then the next book that I read, which also may be making an appearance on my year-end best-of list, is this one here. And this is The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. I very rarely read children's fiction, YA or teen fiction, and I had read 2 of her previous books, and I liked both of those books, but neither of them prepared me for how much I loved this book. If you have kids and you haven't read this yet, either to your kids or with your kids, you absolutely must. Yeah, Kate DiCamillo is a tremendous writer who really believes in the hearts and the intellects of children, I think. And this is the best book of hers that I've read. Hey, Blue. Come here, little mister. Oh, hello, little And then next was one that I kind of just decided on a whim to read in the midst of my autumn TBR. It's been on mine and Kelly's shelves for a really long time. And that is Baker Towers by Jennifer Haigh. And this was a good book. It wasn't a great book. I really wanted it to be a great book. I would call this an example of kind of domestic fiction, which is disparagingly used and really shouldn't be. I would also call Jane Smiley's fiction, much of it, domestic fiction, Ann Tyler's fiction, Alice Munro's fiction. I mean, these are just books that that are more interested in the landscapes of the home and the family than they are in kind of world events, this, that, and the other thing. And there's nothing to be disparaged in that at all. It didn't leave a tremendous impression on me, however, although I did like it enough that I plan to pick up from the library the collection of short stories that is about this town that Baker Towers is set in. And then next, I had what was probably my most disappointing reading experience of the year. And that was reading White Teeth by Zadie Smith. I say disappointing because I had every expectation that this was just going to blow my mind and I was just going to love the shit out of it. I know lots and lots of people who adore this book. And I really couldn't stand it more often than not, actually. I have yet to put up my review of it on Goodreads. I will try to do that soon so that you can kind of read in detail what I didn't like about this book. But there was much. There was much. In a previous video, I talked about how it felt like a kind of pastiche of Salman Rushdie. Early on, it stopped doing that. It would kind of return to that periodically, but there was plenty to dislike about this book, and that's unfortunate because, like I said, I had every expectation of loving it, and I think I gave it 2 stars on Goodreads. And then this morning, I finished 2 books. The first of which is this one. I finished the 10th and final novel in the Kurt Wallander series by Henning Mankell. This is The Troubled Man. And this wasn't, to my mind, the best book in the series, although a lot of critics thought it was the best book in the series. But I would probably rank it number 3, I think, after The Man Who Smiled and One Step Behind. This was just a really poignant kind of conclusion to that character, I felt like. And yeah, I'll be reading the series in its entirety again, starting from book 1 here in a couple of years. So, Henning Mankell, if you have not read his Kurt Wallander series, and you really like crime fiction, detective fiction, what are you waiting for? I'm not sure. And then the other book I finished this morning is the worst book I have read this year, and it is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. I hesitate to call her poet Rupi Kaur, even though this is ostensibly a collection of poetry. I will have more to say on this book in future videos, rest assured, including one that will be extensive and scripted. A lot of trees died for the making of these books, and it's 200 pages long, and it really should have been like a 20-page pamphlet. In a nutshell, I can describe this best with a tennis analogy, and that analogy is every drop shot is a volley in tennis, but not every volley is a drop shot. And while every poem, while every work of art is an act of expression, not every act of expression is a poem or is a work of art. By my count, there are 3 actual poems in this 200-page book, 2 of which suck, 1 of which is decent. Everything else in here just doesn't qualify as poetry as far as I'm concerned. They are acts of expression. They are important in what they're talking about, but they are not poems. the vast majority of the work in this book is not poetry. And like I said, I will get more into that in future videos. And then I also started the other day Kazuo Ishiguro's The Buried Giant, which I'm reading as a buddy read with Robert from Bardo Hordes. So I'm going to dive into this in earnest tonight. And then I'm also still kind of plugging my way through the Shakespeare Wars by Rosenbaum. And those are my hinge books going into the winter. My winter TBR is Dust. So the first book that I'm going to be reading in the winter is going to be my live streamed reread of A Christmas Carol. I'm going to read it over 5 consecutive nights, starting this Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm going to read 1 chapter a night, kind of culminating on Christmas Day night. So I hope you guys will join me for that. After A Christmas Carol, I will be reading Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. This is our current book club book. Been looking forward to this for a long time. And then after that, I will be reading The Call of the Wild by Jack London, because it's the perfect time of year, or would be if we were actually getting any snow, which we haven't really had much of yet this season. I think we've had 2 or 3 storms where we've had 3 or 4 inches each time, and it was gone the next day. It's freaking me out, actually. It's making me really worried about what the spring is going to look like here in Casper. And then I will be reading This Republic of Suffering, Death and the American Civil War by Gilpin. Faust for my Mortality Project. This will be the first book that we read in that project. I will put a link to that announcement video in the description box below. And then I'm going to be doing another buddy read with Marc Nash, and we're going to be reading Ulverton by Adam Thorpe, which has been on my want to read badly list for many years. And when I proposed this to him, he looked it up and read a little bit about it, and found himself curious and apprehensive, and but nonetheless agreed to do it as a buddy read with me. So looking forward to that. John le Carre's The Pigeon Tunnel. I realize it's John le Carre, but I just really don't like saying Carre. It's more work than it should be. So John le Carre's The Pigeon Tunnel, his memoir. And then also for the Mortality Project, I'm going to be reading Roberto Bolano's gigantic book, we might even say mammoth book, 2666. And I've heard mixed things about this over the years from people, but mostly really glowing stuff, including from an old customer of mine at Barnes & Noble, whose taste I trusted implicitly. And this was one of his favorite books. But yeah, so that's it for the winter TBR plans. I have Blue right next to me, a little kitty. It's just like a little loaf of bread here, sitting next to the books. Again, I hope you guys are enjoying Litmus, and I hope your holiday season isn't kind of driving you into the ground like a nail. That's not what it should do, but it is often what it does to people, myself included. So take care of yourselves, and Christmas is coming. It's right around the corner. I really look forward to seeing everybody's post-Christmas book hauls. That'll be a lot of fun. I will see you tomorrow morning with another Litmus video, and tomorrow night reading A Christmas Carol live. Please join me. Adios.